Coming up on today's show, Nicholas Catton is a creativity and emotional expression coach, exploring the world of ethical non-monogamy. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Shambliss. Coming up after the break, my conversation with Nicholas Catton.
Are you bored with dick pics? Do random hookups and empty chats kill your vibe? Tired of being catfished or wasting time with messages from faceless profiles? Then you need to get Monogamish, a new dating app designed for singles and couples of all genders and sexualities, looking for dates, mates, and everything in between. Access exclusive matchmaking events, workshops with dating and sexuality gurus, and exclusive offers so hot you'll just have to see for yourself. Download Monogamish for free from Google Play or the Apple App Store. Monogamish. Explore fluid relationships.
Hello, we are live speaking with our Loving Without Boundaries community. I have one of our members who's been here with the community for some time. We've had some conversations over Facebook. This is the first time we're getting to interact live, so thank you for being here. We have Nick Catton, and I'm excited to have a beautiful conversation with you today.
Yeah, thank you, Kitty. Yeah, it's great to be here. It was really nice to finally meet you and kind of carry this on, the conversations that we're having.
Before you introduce yourself, or maybe in your introduction, I'd love it if you just told me also, like, how long have you been part of our Loving Without Boundaries community?
Yeah, so it's about 2.5 years now. 2.5 years, I think I've been in the Facebook group. And it's actually been a really wonderful group to have been a part of, and it's one of those, Facebook groups, they're a dime a dozen, if you like. It's just not a very English phrase, but yeah, there's many of them, but it's one of the ones that I always circle back to. And I think there's just so much sincerity in the space that's created there, and the kind of problems that people come with, and and also how people interact, and the kind of how the conversations generally get shepherded. There's a lot of intensity in these topics. So it's really cool to see how they sort of soften overall, and, where they end up and how they guide people. So it's been really, really helpful to me, and it's a wonderful community to check in on and be a part of.
Thank you. We're glad to have you here. Time goes by so fast, especially since, COVID and all of that. I was telling you before we went live here that I started the Facebook group back in 2015, and we started with just a few hundred people for several years, and partly during COVID it just boomed into over 11,000 people now. So, and you joined, it sounds like, around that time that it was really booming. So I really appreciate hearing your experience of it, that it feels very sincere. And we have about a team of about 5 or 6 admins and moderators who, it's all volunteer. They're amazing, and they just do their best to just keep it a safe space for people to ask questions and learn from each other. So thank you for noticing that and being one of those people that's here helping create that safe space for other people. So with that, I'd love to just have you introduce yourself however you would like to, so that people get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, pleasure. So my name is Nick. I grew up in a small little town or city in the southwest of England, and I've got quite a multicultural background. My dad was born in Hong Kong. My mum's from the Canary Islands. And so from an early age, it really felt like the world was going to be part of my story. And I started sort of traveling at 18, and then left England around 25 and lived in a shamanic tantric community in Colombia.
Wow.
Which was interesting. And then over the last decade, I've done kind of been in various different places, some entrepreneurship, some coaching work, mostly focused around creativity and self-expression. So there's the sort of authenticity piece of living fully, I guess, living in your full aliveness. Around 7 years ago, I moved to a little island in the Canaries called El Hierro. I bought a little piece of land with a small dwelling, and my dream was to build a little cabin. I worked as a carpenter on and off over the years, and so building my own cabin was a big creative dream of my own. And so that was beautiful to realize there in the small little islands, that very remote, certainly not the sort of place where the frontiers of dating are happening. And yet it was beautiful in the silence to sort of really come into myself in so many ways. And so I think, sexuality is such a individual journey for each of us that has so many dimensions to it that shift and evolve and deepen over time and in our lives. Mm-hmm. And I think, and this can maybe shift into the title, but I think like what I discovered was being very much kind of in the bosom of nature on that island for so many years, that so many things just kind of resolve themselves through being a part of that natural world, if you like. So yeah, and recently, just to tie it up to where I am now, I moved just south of Barcelona with a group of people that are running, well, I met in South America. We were running kind of entrepreneurial community building boot camps, and we'll be kicking that off again in Europe, which is, Barcelona is so much more appealing than Chile, which is a wonderful country, which is where we were before, Chile and Brazil, but just much harder to come through. So we're looking to create a kind of community of frontiers education around all of this stuff, really. And so anyone who's listening and curious to swing by when they're in Barcelona, I'm always up for meeting in person as well. So
that's amazing. It's amazing. What a cool life story. So, yeah, and it's always neat to just connect with people worldwide. But yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of traveling, but I pretty much live on the East Coast of the United States, but love to travel. But yeah, just so interesting just to hear about your background and connect with you when you're across the pond from me. My husband, ironically, is flying to London with his mother this week.
Okay.
So he's going to be doing some traveling on your side of the pond there. Right on. Yeah, thanks for just letting us all get to know you. That's really, really interesting. So yeah, I thought we'd start talking about, I love the topic title that you came up with that I'll share with our viewers, which is the rewilding of sex and relationships, taking love out of the bedroom and back to the forest. I'd love it if you could share, like, what was your thinking behind that title?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of my own work and my own story, I guess, has been around kind of challenging and poking at the idea of domestication. I think domestication has been something that we've been through as a species for, thousands of years. And yet relative to our whole evolution is quite a small slice. And I think when we look at some of the problems that we all face, a whole host of problems, whether it's like environmental collapse, which is obviously a big one, having a planet to live on, but also just our emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. I think in some way you can draw a line between being domesticated animals and some of the ills that we suffer. So, what I love about this community and just in general, like people that are pushing on that frontier of sex and relationships and questioning, just questioning how to do it. I think that this is a rewilding process. If I think of what the wild is, it's being very much in the now of the continual unfolding of whatever life is, right? And so the only definition that's there is what exists in the moment, and the rest is kind of human constructs, and we put fences around things and loving without boundaries. It's like domestication is a process of fencing in and taking a certain wildness, reducing it down into something that's much more manageable, replaceable. It's like it has civilizational value. You can create amazing structures with domesticated people and kind of things that you can rely on, but at the same time it costs us a lot. And so I love this idea of, just exploring how much can we regain of our wildness, not be completely feral, which would be a different thing again. But, how much of our real wild spirits as people can we really trust? And I think that that's such a key piece when exploring relationships, like, trusting and loving yourself and trusting the process that, well, at least not being judgmental of certain signals and emotions and, cues that bring things up in you. And then, taking it out of the bedroom and back to the forest, there's some literal, I'm sure there's some literal fun there that we could all explore. And I think that actually is quite remarkable. And again, that's something I've experienced a lot while being on the island, just how much natural beauty is kind of imprints lovemaking when you're in natural, beautiful places. And it's stunning. We all get wowed and are awestruck by sunsets and forests, mountains, and, so much of Instagram is just like, oh my God, wow, where is that? And that feeling, like really being able to think that in, which is absolutely a privilege, but being able to think up your romance and sex and love into those environments, again, sort of, I think humbles us into the awesomeness of everything that we're a part of, which is certainly different from being locked in an apartment and a bedroom in that way where you're quite disconnected. So as an aspiration, I think it's it's a fun thing to aim for, like just taking your relationships into a more natural context.
That's incredible. I really love how you describe that. And I just happened to have come off the heels of celebrating my 16th anniversary with my husband this past weekend, where we went to the Outer Banks of North Carolina because we got married not inside a building at a church. We got married next to the Body Island Lighthouse, which is so gorgeous. And it was really, really hard to come home, I'll be honest, because it was just that. We were at the Sunset Grill watching sunrises and sunsets and just being in nature. And loved it. And it was really hard to come home. And I was thinking, gosh, as an entrepreneur, like, how can I continue to be thinking about my life and my world and how I'm helping people so that I can get more of that, more of being out in nature. So it's actually really interesting that we're having this conversation today, because I was literally asking this today. And I just love it. It sounds like you just live in really beautiful places, like you really admire nature. So I think this is a great topic. So thank you for the idea and the inception of it. So some questions that you and I had spoken about earlier. I'll just start to walk us through some of those. And I think they're all very interesting questions. So the first one is, what would you say have men who have been in long-term committed relationships forgotten about courtship? It was actually a conversation that you and I started almost a year ago. I can't believe it. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So, this question came because I think a lot of the posts in the community, or a fair few of them, come from men saying like, oh, wow, my partner's getting lots of success. And I'm not, and having been in a relationship for, 8 years or so that then opened up, it was a question that was just really on my mind. And I think that relationships, well, it's kind of like a micro domestication. It's a funny thing because there's that beauty in being the comfort that comes from really knowing someone and feeling super secure and just cozy. And then there's what we let go of, which can be that wilder spirit, which we often tame for what we think is the kind of benefit of the relationship. And so that kind of puts us into a kind of a smaller box, if you like. So I think that when leaving that, and I'll speak to the masculine, I think it probably applies across the board, but to really start to remember that courtship is a process of, it's kind of, this is the theme evidently. So it's like this wild nature thing. It's like, oh, like, why you over someone else? And what I like about this question in the context of this community and people that are exploring polyamory, open relationships, is I think that there's something just so wild about that concept still for most of the population. And that can be a hump to get over, but it can also be, I know that not everyone's jumping at that idea if they find out that you're open with someone. But that there's just intrinsic kind of potential that's embedded in owning that. And to even get to that point, I think that, a lot of the conversations that are happening around masculinity at the moment point to like, oh, men sort of need to step up in some way. I think that's some of the common framing, and I think the people who are already having these conversations and going out there and dating again, for them, they've actually already demonstrated certain emotional capacities to get there. And these are like just so powerful in a courtship context, I think. And so it's something that I lean into, and I think this is a sort of, I'm exploring it in different ways where it's less about sort of seduction and in being impressive in some way, but just really being able to own the emotional capacity that you have had to even get to where you are, and to really that is, that's rare quality, and that can be alluring and at the very least interesting, and that can be worked with. So to sort of sum that up, I would say to really reclaim that wildness, that there's actually something that you are exploring, something you're on a frontier of your own personal life, if you're dating again and in open relationships, having been kind of monogamous for a long time, and that pioneers have always been sexy of some sort. So
I think that's great. Yeah, it's always great to just hear different perspectives and the different ways that people even string sentences together. So it's just fun to hear you describe it this way. But I love looking at it through the lens of, like the forest and the wild and nature. But yeah, to me, the quant of what you're saying, I couldn't agree with more. Just the fact that anyone who is exploring some form of untraditional relationship, like that takes courage, it takes guts, it takes either some emotional maturity or intelligence, or the willingness to go there, the willingness to up-level your skill set. And that takes courage and guts and resilience. So I think that's really beautiful. So to me, that's part of the message is, like owning that you, by being in that space, you already are a sexy beast. That's kind of what I'm hearing.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful. I love that.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So the next question, and again, I love it. This is kind of leaning more towards people in our community that identify as males. How can guys lean into their emotional leadership while dating from having entered into an open or a polyamorous relationship?
Yeah. So, I think this sort of just follows on, but just from recognizing that, like the words you use, that courage is already part of how you've got here. And that, again, from the domestication standpoint, like these are kind of rare qualities. And I think that, how to actually lean into it is like, when we go out there and we're looking for people, we kind of want something, especially if we're feeling, I guess, insecure about ourselves. But I think starting with the fact that you're already exploring an emotional terrain that not many people do. And that actually that is the journey, that there's this relationship to your own emotional development, that is not about getting the date or getting the partner, but that you're already winning by just leading yourself through your own emotional journey as you're exploring all of this. And, this is just something that, I guess it's a question that I just remind myself of, because it's complex, right? Emotions are just, quite often all over the place, and And that's actually really important. So kind of the reality of emotional fluidity is something that I think we all need to lean into, because whenever we feel stuck or whenever we feel like we have an identity around something, that can be like locking in an emotional set of ideas. We have this profile where we're like, oh, these emotions mean this, and I'm stuck in these ways. And I imagine that you are familiar with this when you're working with people. Like actually, when you start to give room for those emotions to flow, things get unstuck or can get unstuck incredibly quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But giving themselves permission to, instead of kind of suppressing or like running away from their feelings, but to just lean into them, get curious about them, emote, right? Like what you're saying is what I'm picking up is just, like that way, just like almost like a river, like it can, since we've got this nature theme, it's like this river of emotions gets you unstuck because you start to move through it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like the leadership part in that is like allowing that river to flow through yourself without trying to contain it. Be like, to trust yourself enough to be the banks of that river that are going to take it where it needs to go. Mm-hmm. While also not kind of putting it on the other person or your partner that they necessarily need to do anything. I think that's one of the things with emotions, is that when they're really directed at someone or on someone, each obviously more common than not the harder emotions to deal with, like anger and being angry at someone or really sad at someone, is kind of manipulative forms of getting what we want out of someone. But the same with being super loving and adoring, which is so just relate, I guess, shifting into a place where you're willing to relate with your own emotions as an experience for yourself, mm-hmm. And so that when you can be comfortable with, like, oh wow, yeah, all of this jealousy is coming up and I can sort of be with it, and it can be really uncomfortable, and like, I think it's so much easier to talk about these things than from afar than when you're really in them. But just that, again, is like such a place of, when I've seen people do that, it just glows and speaks of leadership, because it's like, oh wow, this is, I want some of that. I really respect and appreciate how you're channeling and being with yourself in that way. So yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And I love how you interwove that sense of leadership, like being like, and standing, again, kind of standing in that and owning it, doing it from a place of like, it's a personal journey, no matter what happens with the other people in your life, like it's that journey that's also inside of yourself. And those rare qualities. I wanted to highlight something that you said. I thought it was really beautiful, reminding people that you are already winning as you go through your own emotional journey by exploring this, like that emotional fluidity. So, and I think that river metaphor was really nice that we kind of both came up with there. I think that was a beautiful way to think through that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Another question is, how do you think folks can use open relationships to deeper understand themselves? I'd love to hear you navigate that one. What's neat is because there's a crux of a lot of the work that I do as well. So I'd love to hear your view of that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think, it all ties together a lot. And so any relationship opens up things within ourselves. And, I think that one thing that's interesting specifically about romantic relationships that aren't so much in professional or friendship is that we tend to find attraction in some sort of, not necessarily opposite, but something that's different in some way, and so it's challenging. It's immediately challenging once you're kind of past the honeymoon phase. Mm-hmm. And so being aware that you're exploring sides of yourself with kind of multiple mirrors if you're in, multiple partnerships, but even just like the prospect of the fact that you're maybe, you maybe have a constant, a partner, and that there's some constancy there. But in parallel to that, you're also going through the initial dating process. Like that is in and of itself like two totally different scripts that take a lot of kind of bandwidth and energy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and once you increase that, it's like, oh, wow, does it take more energy, or is this just part of the way I express in my life? And I think that's the sort of thing that I'm playing with personally, of just like exploring those things of like, oh, is this, you know, does this really demand more of me, each person that you add into the mix? Or, you know, or is there a way that I'm just like, actually just, I'm experiencing more of myself, and therefore there's more of myself that needs attention. And the more fluid that I can be with myself in those terms, like, oh, I can be fluid with this part of myself that knows I'm going to get rejected, sometimes for reasons that feel painful or unfair, or, you know, while also not getting rejected by someone, you know. And so it's like, it sort of strengthens the whole of you, I think, in that way, because there's so much stuff going on in parallel, which usually is kind of just, we end up sort of slanting towards one direction, and it's so easy to just sort of lean into where we're strong, or, you know. So I think it just challenges us to grow very holistically. Yeah.
I love the different metaphors that you're coming up with, or we are as well, in terms of, I love that metaphor of that our different relationships can be mirrors, you know, mirrors for us to get more self-understanding or self-mastery. And that can be playful, that can be fun, that can be wild, you know, to bring it back to the nature metaphor.
Right.
And at the same time, as we're navigating, like you said, rejection, it's also a place that we can be courageous and build our inner strength, you know, build our confidence as we're kind of moving through that space, realizing that a lot of it is like you said, like your internal journey, you know, which is really fascinating. It's almost like you're playing and dancing with other people, but it's really about what's going on inside of you.
Right.
Yeah. That's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Mm-hmm. This is an interesting question too, and I'll ponder this myself. But what would you say is the definition of love that you're working with these days? Because I'm sure that might be fluid as well.
Yeah. So, kind of thinking, I come back to, there's a psychologist or psychiatrist called Scott Peck, and he wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled and a Different Drum, which we use in the community building work that we do. And his definition of love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own growth or another's spiritual growth. And, you know, what I love about that is it really kind of embodies the verb part of love, of like, you know, it's kind of something that you have to do, and to how does he, nurturing one's own growth, you know. So I think that love is so, well, I mean, this is why it's hard to define, I think, because there's the obvious kind of good feel side of love, and then there's also the looking out for ourselves and drawing boundaries and not abandoning ourselves, not abandoning other people. And all of these things, it's, you know, when you're in the thick of this, the intensity of difficult emotions and relationships and conflict, having that anchoring point of, actually, I want to be expressing love here, and what does that actually mean? And I think that what I like about this definition is it helps me see that actually sometimes there are relationships that, okay, well, it was a bit more of a fling, or, you know, even the way that I'm saying that energetically, it's like, well, I think I've got a little back door on this one, so I'll just, you know, I'm just going to check out and go, you know, sort of skirt around what may be the more loving thing to do. And that's not to say that there's a hard rule, and I think of how we need to behave, but I think that having some sort of guidance around, okay, if I'm to be truly loving in this situation, then what is it to love myself, and what is it to love the other person? And part of that is to And I think what often comes up, if I think of conflict, is we get defensive, right? And I think that so often our defensiveness cuts us off from loving ourselves enough to actually receive, even if it's just, that one thing in the 10 things that someone's accusing you of. And it's like, oh, we're so defensive. But if we can be in a place of love for ourselves and for the other person, like, oh, wow, you're being super vulnerable to like lose your shit at me right now. Like you could be costing us the whole relationship. Who knows? There's some vulnerability there. But to be able to like be in a space of love and say, wow, for my own growth, I'm going to hear the truth in this and be grateful for it. And do what I can for my own growth and likewise extend the same to you, even if you don't want to hear it. And that's fine, because that's your responsibility. And it's not, I will do my, a sincere and earnest attempt to not make it as spiky as it could be or whatever, but to lovingly deliver truth. I think that as an adjective and as a verb, it can help guide our way through what is just, the hardest things, really. Well, what can be the hardest things, these relationships.
Yeah, so much gold in what you said there that I'd love to underscore. I love how you said to have the courage as well as the vulnerability to lovingly deliver truth. Like it's an act of love for ourselves by being able to like speak it, right? And also an act of, as you said, maybe giving a gift. I sometimes view criticism. I used to be very defensive about criticism and, for my own upbringing and things of that nature. And I was doing a lot of work around reframing it. And that's exactly what I started to do, is to reframe criticism as a gift, that somebody's saying, I care about you enough to offer you this pearl of wisdom, or maybe you don't see this about yourself, and I'm giving this to you because I love you. It's not to cut you down. Sometimes it might be, but like kind of maybe giving the other person the benefit of the doubt. Or,
right.
But I think that's beautiful, to lovingly deliver truth and to honor that. Like I said, it takes vulnerability in some ways to lose your shit. And it also takes vulnerability to also like not run away if you're the one receiving it, and to be able to ask that scary question, is there some truth to this, and look at it from a place also of self-love instead of beating yourself up. That's kind of what I'm hearing from that as well. There's a book I read once that's I also thought that was interesting, called Love is Letting Go of Fear. So I think sometimes like defensiveness is partly our fear showing up, like we're trying to protect ourselves, or just different ways that love, which is almost like a courageous act. Like just saying I love you can feel very vulnerable and courageous. And fear is like kind of shutting down and just not speaking our truth, or not saying maybe the words that may need to be said, even if it's kind of scary, right?
Oh, yes. So so true. I love all of that. Like there is so much. The truth is often scary, I think, in a way. It's, especially when it comes from the sort of, these ethereal places, which you can't quite pinpoint and don't necessarily make rational sense. And, we so want to make sense and be understood. And sometimes the truest things just can't be. And I think that's a big part of self-trust as well.
Self-trust. I love that. This is a question that's come up in our community that I'd love to hear your take on it. Sometimes I see somebody who has maybe been really struggling with identifying as polyamorous or desiring an open relationship, and there could be like a ton of guilt and shame around that identity. But then if they're in a relationship with somebody who's monogamous, who isn't interested in, like, they want to be in a monogamous relationship, it can be hard for that first person to speak their truth, like to say, hey, look, I believe that I'm polyamorous and I think that's who I am. And I think I need to go live that life. And I honor where you're at, but that that's not really, I don't think that's my path. And there can be a lot of guilt around breaking up, breaking up with like the monogamous person so that you both can go live your truth. You know what I mean? So I've seen this. It's something that I've come across. So just in the context of our conversation, I'd love to hear your take on it, because it seems very interwoven in terms of being able to have the courage to speak one's truth and to walk that path.
Yeah. I mean, I think that can be super terrifying. And I think the only thing that I can really sort of say to it, just from a personal, having lived some of those stories, is that the aliveness that you will feel, really just having the courage to have those conversations, that even more than the identity, I think this is perhaps, if there's some advice in here, it's like that there's that aliveness that you seek. It may, sometimes it may take the form of an identity or a label, and it's like that can be a signpost for us, like, oh, aliveness here, and we're like, there's something that speaks to me in that. But beyond the identity, for me, I think there's that, like, oh wow, at the heart of this is just an aliveness which flows and evolves and changes and is part of nature and is quite wild. And it can help to put some of these labels on it. But actually at the heart of it, I want to be connected to that sort of, that movement of my being in a way that makes me feel alive. And as terrifying as it can be, I think the words that you use were great. It's like, my path, it's not in disrespect of your path. But that there's not really much compromise in that. Like, it's kind of a bit of an all or nothing thing. And that's not to say it dictates the way the relationship unfolds or whether it does lead to breakup or not. And I think that's a really important piece, that so often we are trying to calculate everything. Part of the fear comes from thinking that we can actually calculate exactly what's going to happen. And it's terrifying. It's like, well, that outcome's horrendous, and that's totally worse than what I'm living right now. How could I ever? But I think to really trust the moment to moment unfolding, and that's why, these other tools of really bringing your vulnerability and bringing love into the way that you have those conversations, and being that anchor that, like, your partner, whoever's receiving that information, they might spin out and you might spin out, but you're still here, right? It's all happening right here. And as long as you're there together, then the connection is what counts. And so the connection can be whatever the two of you decide it to be. And so I think the main thing is, like, to notice that if you're calculating and going forward and then creating these future scenarios that really scare you, that actually, more often than not, it's not quite that bad, and that you actually, the resources that you tap into by owning your truth just give you this well of the depth of you, that when you walk with that knowledge that you have that depth, then suddenly some of those scenarios no longer seem as daunting.
That was beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that perspective and kind of anchoring it back to your own personal journey of that aliveness, and that it's almost like a quest that you're going on. And I love that, just kind of that trusting of yourself each step of the way, that you'll be okay. That's beautiful. One last question, because I want to, of course, be respectful of your time, and then we'll start to wrap it up. But what would you say are the energetics of creating a life that you want? And how does that relate to maybe being in multiple relationships?
Yeah, so I think this one's great, coming from that other question of, like, this aliveness. So when I think of the word energetic, to me, it just means, like, oh, what's the energy that I'm feeling right now? And I think there's, we have stuck energy, we have, like, spontaneous energy. We have all of these different ways. I think of kind of the language that our being speaks is often energetic. And I think that in domesticated lives and domesticated relationships, we say no to a lot of things that would otherwise be a wild yes. Like in the wild, we'll be like, oh yeah, totally. I'm all about that. Like I'm going, it's like a lot of that gets kind of tampered down or tapered, I guess, to be a little bit more civilized, if you like. So I think it can be really useful to think in terms of like, am I a yes to this or am I a no? And in the context of exploring these different relationships, being willing, being willing for your compass to be that internal knowing, that you trusted yourself to get here. You had that difficult conversation and now you're here. And then the mind has an idea of what that's about. And so it's like, oh, well, that's about, I would really love to have sex with these super attractive people or group sex or who knows, whatever it is, whatever the kind of fantasy is. And then you can be in that scenario. And if you let your mind do the deciding for you, then that's the thing that will happen as well. But when I think of creating your life in this way from that energetic standpoint, it's just to be willing to be like, oh, wow, this is actually a no. And I'm not needing any justification, just that is a sort of a deep truth. Like, it was a yes 10 minutes ago, and now it feels like a no. And, and that can be inconvenient for you as much as the people that you're interacting with. But I think that owning that, and again, that trust that like, I think the opening up in these ways can, we can all go through lots of sort of, it's almost like we're teenagers again in some way. I was like, oh wow, what's the word? Am I being super fickle? Am I not? But we're adults, we're adults now. I think one of the beauties of the adult journey and creating in these multiple relationships is like, let me first be an adult to myself and really trust that, if the no's a no, that's not an imposition on someone else. It might be inconvenient, but your being, your aliveness, your truth is actually what you have in this life and where all of the beautiful experiences will come from. And I think over, especially long-term monogamous relationships, we kind of forget that. Kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. But there's just this beautiful opportunity to play with it in different ways. And that if you are, you are seeking, if the compass is like, I'm seeking my aliveness sexually, romantically, all of these things, then it's just a really cool kind of compass to go back to like, is this actually a yes or is this a no? And then it can be quite a simple way of just grounding it down.
Yeah, no, I think that was a beautiful answer to that and a way to kind of make everything come full circle. So well played.
Thank you, Kissy. This has been really fun.
Yeah. No, I really, truly enjoyed the conversation as well as getting to know you. I'm just so happy that you're a part of our community and that you're giving your voice and your thoughts here that are certainly well considered. I can certainly tell that. So if anybody wanted to reach out to you, how can people find you? Obviously, you're part of the community here. Are you open to somebody sending a Facebook chat? Since we were talking about yeses and nos and consent.
Yeah, absolutely. I will own each one of those on a post by post basis or message by message. But I'm very happy to talk about all of this stuff. If any of this has kind of sparked any curiosity and people would like to dig in a bit deeper, I would love to have those conversations.
That's beautiful. Thank you for being another resource and a safe place for folks and offering your wisdom. You just have a beautiful way with words. I love the different metaphors that we were talking about today, because I always think that helps people understand some content, complex topics. So for anybody who is watching, if you are struggling in your relationships, whether that is struggling with jealousy or you're building your emotional intelligence muscle, or maybe releasing guilt and shame, just know that you can reach out to me. Let me just make sure I'm putting this up here. So you can go to that link, lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. And there we can have a beautiful conversation and we can dive into what some of your struggles are. And if I do feel that I can help you, I will talk about different ways that we can get you a game plan to get you where you want to go. And if you're not a fit, or I feel like maybe I'm not the right person, I may refer you to somebody. That's partly why I do these interviews, is I love talking to people all over the globe so that I get to understand what their expertise is. So if I'm not the right person, I will do my best to steer you in the right direction for you. So with that, just want to say, Nick, thank you again for your time. This was really a lovely, beautiful conversation. Thanks for being one of the great people that's sharing your wisdom, hard-earned wisdom, I can tell, and your time with us here today. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. All right. And with that, we will see you later, Loving Without Boundaries community. We appreciate you, and we hope you are having a great week. Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply, and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes, and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships, while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.